Captain Eleanor Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the USS Defiant, her dark eyes scanning the horizon where enemy ships lurked like predators waiting to strike. The salty wind whipped through her black hair as she gripped the railing, her knuckles white with tension. At 28, she was the youngest captain in the fleet, a position she had earned through years of dedication and countless battles that tested her resolve. The communication device crackled to life, interrupting her thoughts. Admiral Marcus Kane's stern voice echoed across the bridge, carrying the authority of decades spent commanding the seas. His reputation preceded him wherever he went, a man who had never lost a battle, never shown mercy to those who opposed him, and never tolerated insubordination from his officers. Captain Rodriguez, you are hereby ordered to retreat immediately. Fall back to safe harbor and await further instructions. The Admiral's voice boomed through the speakers, causing several crew members to glance nervously at their captain. Eleanor felt her jaw tighten as she processed the command. Below deck, her crew of 200 sailors worked tirelessly to prepare their weapons and defensive systems. These men and women had followed her through impossible situations before, trusting her judgment even when the odds seemed stacked against them. They looked to her for leadership, for the courage to face whatever dangers lay ahead. The enemy fleet consisted of 12 heavily armed warships, each one bristling with advanced weaponry that could sink a vessel in minutes. Their black hulls cut through the water like sharks, moving in perfect formation toward the coastal city of Port Haven, where over 50,000 innocent civilians went about their daily lives, unaware of the approaching danger. Elena knew what retreat meant. Without the USS Defiant and her sister ships standing guard, Port Haven would fall within hours. The enemy had been planning this attack for months, waiting for the perfect moment to strike when the main fleet was deployed elsewhere. This small defensive force was all that stood between the civilians and complete destruction. Lieutenant Commander James Mitchell, her second in command, approached carefully. His weathered face showed the stress of the situation as he spoke in a low voice. Captain, the Admiral's orders are clear. We should begin the withdrawal procedures immediately. Elena turned to face him, her expression unreadable. Mitchell had served under 3 different captains before her, and he understood the weight of military protocol. Orders from an admiral were not suggestions. They were absolute commands that could result in court-martial if disobeyed. Lieutenant Commander, how long would it take for the enemy fleet to reach Port Haven if we withdraw now? Elena asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her mind. Mitchell consulted his tactical display, running quick calculations. Approximately 4 hours, Captain. Maybe less if they increase their speed once they realize we're not defending the approach. Elena walked to the large viewport that offered a clear view of the approaching enemy ships. Their formation was impressive, a testament to their training and preparation. She could see the glint of sunlight reflecting off their gun barrels, each one capable of devastating damage. The communication device buzzed again. Admiral Kane's voice returned, this time with an edge of impatience. Captain Rodriguez, I'm waiting for confirmation of your compliance with my direct order. Begin your withdrawal immediately. Elena reached for the communication device, her hand hovering over the response button. Every officer on the bridge watched her carefully, understanding that her next words would determine not only their fate, but the fate of thousands of innocent people sleeping peacefully in their homes, unaware that their lives hung in the balance.
He thought about her younger sister Maria, who lived in Port Haven with her husband and 2 small children.
Maria worked as a teacher at the local elementary school, spending her days nurturing young minds and helping them discover the wonders of learning. Those children trusted adults to keep them safe, to protect them from the horrors of war that they were too young to understand. Elena also remembered her father, a retired naval officer who had taught her the importance of duty and honor. He had always told her that true leadership meant making difficult decisions, even when those decisions came with personal cost. A real leader, he had said, protects those who cannot protect themselves. The tactical officer, Ensign Sarah Chen, called out from her station. Captain, enemy ships are maintaining their current course and speed. They'll be within firing range of our position in 30 minutes. Elena finally pressed the communication button, her voice calm and determined. Admiral Kane, I respectfully acknowledge your order, but I cannot comply at this time. The bridge fell silent except for the humming of various electronic systems. Every crew member understood the gravity of what their captain had just done. Refusing a direct order from an admiral was unprecedented, especially in the middle of a tactical situation. Admiral Kane's response came quickly, his voice filled with barely controlled anger. Captain Rodriguez, you will comply with my order immediately. or I will have you removed from command and court-martialed for insubordination." Elena looked around at her crew, men and women who had served faithfully, who trusted her judgment, who believed in the mission to protect innocent lives. She saw determination in their eyes, not fear. They understood what was at stake, and they were ready to follow her lead regardless of the consequences. "Admiral, with all due respect, I have a duty to protect the civilians of Port Haven. I cannot abandon them to face this threat alone," Elena replied, her voice growing stronger with each word. The communication channel erupted with Admiral Kane's furious response. "You have just made the biggest mistake of your career, Captain Rodriguez. I am ordering the fleet to return immediately to deal with your insubordination. You will face the full consequences of military justice." Elena reached over and switched off the communication device, cutting off the Admiral's continued threats. She turned to face her bridge crew, seeing a mixture of concern and admiration in their expressions. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced clearly, "we have a job to do. The enemy thinks they can intimidate us into abandoning our post. They believe that one Admiral's order will make us turn tail and run while innocent people face destruction." She paused, looking each crew member in the eye. "They're wrong. We took an oath to defend those who cannot defend themselves. Today, we honor that oath, regardless of the personal cost." Lieutenant Commander Mitchell stepped forward, his voice steady. "Captain, the crew stands with you. What are your orders?" Elena moved to the tactical display, studying the enemy formation and the geography of the surrounding waters. Port Haven sat at the mouth of a natural harbor, protected on three sides by rocky cliffs that made direct assault nearly impossible. The only way for the enemy fleet to attack was through the narrow channel where the USS Defiant now positioned itself. "We're going to use the terrain to our advantage," Elena explained, pointing to specific locations on the map. "The channel narrows to about 2 kilometers at its most restrictive point. If we position ourselves correctly, we can force them to attack us 1 or 2 ships at a time, instead of using their full numerical advantage." Ensign Chen looked up from her console with growing excitement. "Captain, if we coordinate our defensive fire with the coastal batteries on those cliffs, we might actually have a chance of stopping them." Elena nodded approvingly. "Exactly, Ensign. We're not just going to make a stand. We're going to win this battle." As the USS Defiant moved into its defensive position, Elena couldn't help but think about the smirk that had crossed her face when Admiral Kane delivered his ultimatum. He thought he could intimidate her with threats of court-martial and career destruction, but he had fundamentally misunderstood what motivated her. Elena Rodriguez had not joined the Navy for personal glory or career advancement. She had joined to serve something greater than herself, to stand between innocent people and those who would do them harm. Admiral Kane's threats only strengthened her resolve and confirmed that she was making the right choice. The enemy ships continued their steady approach, unaware that they were sailing toward an opponent who had just chosen duty over career, honor over safety, and the lives of civilians over her own future. Elena Rodriguez had made her choice, and now she would see it through to whatever end awaited them all. The USS Defiant settled into position at the narrowest point of the channel, her massive guns trained on the approaching enemy fleet. Captain Rodriguez moved between stations on the bridge, checking readiness reports and coordinating with the coastal defense batteries that dotted the cliffsides overlooking the harbor entrance. "Captain, incoming transmission from Port Haven Command," Communications Officer Bradley announced, his fingers dancing across his control panel as he worked to establish a clear connection. Elena nodded, accepting the call from Mayor Patricia Williams, a woman in her 50s who had led the coastal city through numerous challenges during her decade in office. The mayor's voice carried obvious stress as she spoke from the emergency command center deep beneath the city hall. "Captain Rodriguez, we've received word about Admiral Kane's withdrawal order. Our radar shows you're still holding position. Can you tell me what's happening out there?" Elena chose her words carefully, knowing that panic among the civilian population would only make the situation worse. "Mayor Williams, we're maintaining our defensive position. I want you to initiate the emergency evacuation protocol for all residents within 5 kilometers of the harbor. Move them to the designated safety zones in the hills. Captain, that's over 20,000 people. The evacuation will take hours to complete properly," the mayor responded, her voice reflecting the enormous logistical challenge of moving so many civilians to safety.
"I understand, Mayor. We'll buy you as much time as we can," Elena replied, ending the transmission before turning her attention back to the tactical situation developing around them.
The enemy fleet had arranged itself into a classic attack formation. The largest warship, a massive battlecruiser with enough firepower to level city blocks, positioned itself at the center of the formation. Flanking it were 6 destroyers, their sleek hulls designed for speed and maneuverability. Behind them came 5 support vessels carrying additional ammunition and repair equipment for extended combat operations. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell studied the enemy formation through high-powered binoculars, noting details that might prove crucial in the coming battle. Captain, their lead ship appears to be the ENS Retribution. Intelligence reports indicate she carries advanced missile systems and electromagnetic pulse weapons. Elena absorbed this information while calculating their defensive options. The USS Defiant was heavily armed for a ship of her class, but she faced overwhelming numerical superiority. Success would depend on tactics, positioning, and the courage of her crew rather than raw firepower. Ensign Chen, what's the status of our defensive coordination with the coastal batteries? Elena asked, moving to review the tactical display that showed friendly and enemy positions. Captain, we have confirmed communication with Battery Alpha on the northern cliff and Battery Beta on the southern approach. Each battery has 6 long-range guns capable of reaching targets throughout the channel, Chen reported, her voice reflecting the confidence that came from knowing they weren't fighting alone. Elena's communication device suddenly crackled to life again. Admiral Kane's voice returned, but this time he sounded different, less angry and more calculating, as if he had spent time developing a new strategy to deal with her insubordination. Captain Rodriguez, I'm prepared to offer you one final opportunity to comply with my direct order. Withdraw immediately, and I will recommend clemency during your court-martial proceedings. Continue this reckless course of action, and I will ensure that you face the maximum penalties available under military law. Elena paused for a moment, considering the Admiral's offer. She thought about her naval career, the years of training and dedication that had brought her to this position of command. A court-martial would end everything she had worked for, destroying her reputation and making it impossible to serve in any military capacity. But then she looked out at the approaching enemy ships and thought about the families in Port Haven who were frantically packing their belongings and evacuating to safety. She imagined children confused and frightened by the sudden disruption to their lives, parents struggling to explain why they had to leave their homes behind. Elena reached for the communication device, her voice steady and resolute. Admiral Kane, I appreciate your offer, but my answer remains unchanged. We will not abandon our post while civilians remain in danger. The silence that followed her response lasted nearly 30 seconds before Admiral Kane's voice returned, filled with cold fury. Very well, Captain Rodriguez. You have chosen your path. When this is over, you will face the full consequences of your actions. Elena switched off the communication device and turned to address her bridge crew. Gentlemen and ladies, you heard the Admiral. Anyone who wishes to log an official objection to my orders may do so now. I will not hold it against you, and it may provide some protection during any subsequent investigations. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell stepped forward without hesitation. Captain, the bridge crew stands united with your decision. We took an oath to defend innocent lives, and that's exactly what we're going to do. Similar declarations of support came from every officer and enlisted person on the bridge. Elena felt a surge of pride in her crew, knowing that they understood the principles at stake and were willing to risk their careers to do what they believed was right.
Enemy ships are now within firing range, Captain.
Tactical Officer Reynolds announced from his station. They're maintaining formation but reducing speed. It appears they're preparing for a coordinated attack. Elena studied the enemy formation through her binoculars, noting the way their ships moved with practiced precision. These were experienced naval officers who had planned this attack carefully, confident that their numerical superiority would overwhelm any defense. All stations prepare for combat, Elena commanded, her voice carrying throughout the ship via the internal communication system. This is not a drill. We are about to engage a superior enemy force in defense of Port Haven. Every sailor aboard this vessel knew this day might come when they took their oath of service. The USS Defiant's crew responded with remarkable efficiency. Weapon systems hummed to life as targeting computers locked onto enemy vessels, defensive shields activated, and damage control teams positioned themselves throughout the ship to respond quickly to any hits they might sustain. Captain, incoming transmission from the enemy fleet, Communications Officer Bradley reported. Elena accepted the transmission, curious to hear what the enemy commander might have to say before the battle began. USS Defiant, this is Admiral Victor Kozlov aboard the ENS Retribution. You are outnumbered and outgunned. Surrender immediately, and your crew will be treated according to international maritime law. Elena studied the enemy flagship through her binoculars, noting its imposing size and the number of weapon systems visible on its hull. Admiral Kozlov had a reputation as a skilled tactician who rarely failed to achieve his objectives. Admiral Kozlov, this is Captain Elena Rodriguez. Port Haven is under the protection of the United States Navy. Any attempt to attack civilian targets will be met with full defensive force. Admiral Kozlov's response came with a hint of amusement in his voice. Captain Rodriguez, you command a single ship against my entire fleet. Your bravery is admirable but futile. Stand down and avoid unnecessary bloodshed. Elena smiled grimly as she prepared her response. Admiral, you're about to discover that sometimes one ship in the right position is worth more than a dozen ships in the wrong place. We will not stand down. The enemy fleet began to spread out as much as the narrow channel would allow, trying to bring maximum firepower to bear on the USS Defiant's position. Elena watched their movements carefully, noting that their formation was precisely what she had hoped for. All batteries, prepare to engage, Elena commanded, knowing that the next few minutes would determine not only the fate of her ship and crew, but also the lives of thousands of civilians who were counting on them for protection. The ENS Retribution's main guns began to rotate toward the USS Defiant, their massive barrels gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. Elena knew that once those guns fired, there would be no turning back. The battle for Port Haven was about to begin, and she had positioned her ship and crew directly in the path of overwhelming enemy firepower. Elena Rodriguez had made her choice when she smirked at Admiral Kane's command and told him he had made his biggest mistake. Now she would discover whether her defiant stand would save the civilians she was sworn to protect or result in the destruction of everything she held dear. The first salvo from the ENS Retribution erupted in a thunderous roar that echoed off the cliff walls surrounding the harbor entrance. Massive shells screamed through the air, their trajectory calculated to devastate the USS Defiant's position. Captain Rodriguez gripped the bridge railing as her ship shuddered under the impact of near misses, water and debris spraying across the deck. "Return fire, all batteries!" Elena commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos of battle. The USS Defiant's main guns responded immediately, sending their own deadly payload toward the enemy flagship. The sound was deafening, and the ship lurched backward from the recoil of its massive weapons. Ensign Chen monitored the tactical display as friendly and enemy fire crisscrossed the narrow channel. "Captain, direct hit on the lead destroyer. She's taking on water and falling behind the formation." Elena watched through her binoculars as the damaged enemy ship struggled to maintain its position. Smoke poured from a gaping hole in its hull, and she could see crew members fighting desperately to control the flooding that threatened to sink their vessel. The coastal batteries on the cliff tops joined the battle with a coordinated barrage that caught the enemy fleet by surprise. Battery Alpha's 6 guns targeted the northern edge of the enemy formation, while Battery Beta concentrated on the southern flank. The crossfire created a deadly gauntlet that forced the enemy ships to bunch together in the center of the channel. "This is exactly what we hoped for," Lieutenant Commander Mitchell observed, pointing to the tactical display. "They're being forced into our kill zone where their numerical advantage becomes a liability." Admiral Kozlov's voice crackled over the radio, his earlier confidence replaced by frustrated anger. "All ships, focus fire on that coastal artillery. Eliminate those gun positions immediately." Several enemy destroyers broke formation to attack the clifftop batteries, their guns elevating to target the defensive positions that had been carved into the rocky coastline decades earlier. Elena watched as explosions bloomed along the cliff faces, but the well-protected gun positions continued to return fire. "Captain, the NS Retribution is moving to engage us directly," Tactical Officer Rendels announced. "She's increasing speed and heading straight for our position." Elena studied the enemy flagship's approach, recognizing Admiral Kozlov's strategy. By charging directly at the USS Defiant, he was trying to close the range where his ship's superior firepower could overwhelm her defenses. It was a bold move that demonstrated his confidence in his vessel's capabilities. "All hands, brace for impact," Elena announced over the ship's communication system. "We're about to face their flagship at close range. Every sailor needs to be ready for heavy combat." The ENS Retribution's second salvo struck the USS Defiant directly, the massive shells punching through her outer armor and causing significant damage to her forward sections. Emergency alarms sounded throughout the ship as damage control teams rushed to contain fires and repair critical systems. "Damage report," Elena called out, maintaining her position on the bridge despite the chaos surrounding her. "Forward gun battery 2 is offline, Captain," Chief Engineer Thompson reported from the engine room. "We've lost primary power to the bow sections, but backup systems are holding. Casualties are being reported from multiple decks." Elena felt the weight of command as she realized that her defiant stand was costing the lives of her crew members. These were people who had trusted her judgment and followed her into battle against overwhelming odds. Their sacrifice would only be meaningful if she could find a way to achieve victory. The communication device buzzed with an incoming transmission from Mayor Williams in Port Haven. "Captain Rodriguez, evacuation is 60% complete. We need more time to get everyone to safety." "Understood, Mayor. Hold your position and continue the evacuation." "We're not done fighting yet," Elena replied, ending the transmission before turning her attention back to the tactical situation. Admiral Kozlov's flagship continued its aggressive approach, its massive guns firing repeatedly at the USS Defiant's position. Elena realized that she needed a new strategy. Continuing to trade shots at this range would eventually result in her ship's destruction. "Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, prepare the crew for emergency maneuvers," Elena ordered, moving to the ship's helm controls. "We're going to try something unexpected." Mitchell looked confused but followed orders without question. "All hands prepare for emergency maneuvers. Secure all loose equipment and brace for rapid course changes." Elena studied the narrow channel's geography, noting the underwater rock formations that made navigation treacherous for large vessels. Most ships avoided these areas because of the risk of running aground, but Elena was counting on her smaller ship's greater maneuverability. "Helm! Hard to starboard! Take us into the shallow waters near the northern cliff face," Elena commanded. The USS Defiant responded to her captain's orders, turning sharply away from the deep water channel where Admiral Kozlov expected her to remain. The ship's sonar operator called out depth warnings as they entered dangerous waters where one miscalculation could ground them permanently. Admiral Kozlov's voice erupted over the radio in disbelief. "She's heading into the shallows." "That's suicide. No ship that size can navigate those waters safely." Elena smiled as she heard the enemy commander's reaction. Admiral Kozlov was right that the maneuver was extremely dangerous, but Elena had studied these waters extensively during her training years. She knew exactly where the deepest channels lay and how to navigate them safely. The ENS Retribution attempted to follow the USS Defiant into the shallow waters, but was forced to slow dramatically to avoid the underwater obstacles that could tear open her hull. Elena had successfully separated the enemy flagship from the rest of the fleet, evening the odds considerably. "Now we have them where we want them," Elena announced to her crew. "Fire all remaining batteries. Target their engine compartments." The USS Defiant's guns spoke again, this time with devastating effect. Her shells struck the ENS Retribution's engine sections, causing massive explosions that sent black smoke billowing into the afternoon sky. The enemy flagship's speed dropped dramatically as her propulsion systems suffered critical damage. From her new position, Elena could also coordinate more effectively with the coastal batteries. The crossfire pattern that had been disrupted by the enemy's charge could now be re-established with even greater effectiveness. "Battery Alpha, concentrate fire on the destroyers attempting to flank our position," Elena radioed to the clifftop gun positions. "Battery Beta, maintain suppressive fire on the support vessels." The tide of battle began to turn as the enemy fleet found itself unable to utilize its numerical superiority effectively. Several destroyers had sustained significant damage from the coastal artillery, while the flagship remained trapped in the shallow waters where its massive size became a disadvantage rather than an asset. Admiral Kozlov made one final attempt to salvage his attack, ordering his remaining destroyers to ignore the USS Defiant and proceed directly to bombard Port Haven. It was a desperate move that showed his willingness to target civilians in order to achieve his mission objectives. Elena anticipated this strategy and was ready with a response. "All ships, this is USS Defiant. Any vessel that attempts to bypass our position will be engaged with full force. We will not allow attacks on civilian targets." The remaining enemy destroyers found themselves caught between the USS Defiant's guns and the coastal artillery, in a crossfire that made their advance impossible. One by one, they were forced to withdraw or face complete destruction. Hours later, as the sun began to set over Port Haven, the surviving enemy ships retreated from the harbor entrance. The ENS Retribution, heavily damaged and barely able to maintain propulsion, led the withdrawal with Admiral Kozlov's plans in complete ruins. Elena stood on the bridge of her battered but victorious ship, watching the enemy fleet disappear into the distance. The USS Defiant had sustained significant damage and casualties, but Port Haven remained safe. The evacuation was now complete, and the civilian population was secure in their mountain shelters. The communication device crackled to life with Admiral Kane's voice, though this time his tone was markedly different from his earlier threats. "Captain Rodriguez, I have received preliminary reports of your engagement. It appears your unconventional tactics were successful in repelling the enemy attack." Elena paused before responding, knowing that her career still hung in the balance despite the victory she had achieved. "Admiral Kane, Port Haven is secure, and enemy forces have withdrawn from our territorial waters. Captain, there will still need to be an investigation into your refusal to follow direct orders," Admiral Kane continued, though his voice lacked its previous fury. "However, the successful defense of civilian populations will certainly be taken into consideration during any proceedings." Elena realized that Admiral Kane was beginning to understand the same truth she had recognized earlier. Sometimes military protocol had to take second place to the fundamental duty to protect innocent lives. Her smirk at his original command had been justified by the results of her defiant stand. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell approached with the final casualty and damage reports. 23 crew members had been wounded during the battle, but remarkably, none had been killed. The USS Defiant would need extensive repairs, but she remained seaworthy and capable of defending her position. "Captain, message coming in from Mayor Williams," Communications Officer Bradley announced. Elena accepted the transmission from Port Haven, where the civilian population was beginning to return to their homes after the successful defense of their city. "Captain Rodriguez, on behalf of every citizen of Port Haven, thank you. Your decision to stand and fight saved thousands of lives today. We will never forget what you and your crew did for us." Elena looked around at her bridge crew, men and women who had risked their careers and their lives because they believed in doing what was right rather than what was easy. They had proven that sometimes a single ship commanded by people with courage and conviction could accomplish what seemed impossible. As reports of the battle spread throughout the naval command structure, Elena Rodriguez became known as the captain who smirked at an admiral's command and proved him wrong. Her defiant stand at Port Haven demonstrated that the greatest military victories sometimes come from those brave enough to challenge authority when innocent lives hang in the balance. The USS Defiant remained on station as Port Haven celebrated its survival, a testament to the power of moral courage in the face of overwhelming odds. Elena Rodriguez had made her choice, and history would remember her not as the officer who disobeyed orders, but as the hero who saved a city when no one else would stand and fight.